All right, so we've gone through our trigger point for fixing our squat. Now it's time to mobilize our pattern. So I'm going to take you through some mobility stretches that work on hip extension and internal and external rotation of the hip to free up those tight hips to allow you to reach your squat pattern with ease. The first one is a simple sitting drill. Now, you might be wondering why we're doing a sitting drill. Now, this is all directly related to ankle mobility and also that trigger point release we did for our feet. Sitting here for 2 to 3 minutes with our toes pulled underneath ourselves. This is one version of our sitting drill. Sitting here for 2 to 3 minutes, knees are together. This might actually be quite uncomfortable for some people. So we want to move up the time span if we need to. If we can only get 30 seconds out, come in for 2 or 3 more efforts after that. And we're going to sit here. This allows just that tissue to lengthen on the bottom of our feet to allow our proprioception to be as good as possible when we're in that squat pattern. Sitting here 2 to 3 minutes, sitting on our feet for 2 to 3 minutes. Now, if we've got really jacked up or messed up ankle joints, this might be uncomfortable as well. So we want to be barefoot so our shoes don't get in the way, but we also want to be able to take a bit of tension off by raising up off with our hands if we're starting to find that's painful. We don't want to push into pain. The trick with mobilizing your pattern, you need to feel safe enough to allow those muscle spindles to relax. Now, we're here for 2 to 3 minutes. They're your sitting drills. Now, with all of these that we're teaching you, you pick the ones that work for you. If these ones are stiff and tight or they're going to need work, you put these in your warm-up. If they're easy, you might want to move on to something else. Ankle mobility. In our squat pattern, we absolutely need it to have an effective squat movement. Now, you've learnt about ankle mobility and what the optimal and acceptable ranges are, 2 to 4 inches being acceptable and 4 inches plus being optimal. But I'm going to take you through a quick mobility exercise to make sure you're hitting those dorsiflexion ankle mobility limits so you can optimize your squat pattern. So we're going to be in that half kneeling position. This is very much like the way we tested it, but we're going to use our hands to manipulate some weight and some positional elements to make sure we can push right into that ankle joint to make sure we get the most out of this mobility stretch. Now, we're going to put a bit of weight on top of our knee. That's going to cause compression in the ankle joint, and we're going to keep that hand on the back of the heel, and that's going to stop that heel peeling up off the floor. Now, remembering through our ankle mobility screen, we want that knee to travel over the line between the big toe and the second toe. So we're simply going to be pushing into that range without that heel popping up, pushing down onto our knee as we go through the movement, making sure you're not letting that ankle peel up. Now we can get in there, we can sit in here, really push our heel into the floor, and then drag that movement back. We're going to go here for 2 to 3 minutes each side. Now, what we want to do is test before you start and test at the finish and know how much this has improved. Remembering you can start on a line so you know how far to measure forward. You can use things like a ruler, measuring tape to measure how far forward or how much range you have, and make sure you keep an eye on those asymmetries, i.e. that uneven side, to make sure you're working on the less optimal side or side with the most restricted range enough to get it close to even or as best possible. And if you can't do it yourself, make sure you refer yourself out for someone to take a look at it, maybe add some manual therapy to help you along your way. The next we're going to move on to is hip extension. Now, I'm in hip extension here. If we can't reach this position comfortably, we need to take some work to do it. Now, we're going to use our rack here, and we're going to do what's called a couch stretch. Now, this has been pretty popular, so you've probably seen this before. And we're simply going to bring our foot up, and we're going to walk our knee into the anchor position or closer to the wall or the rack or what we're using. We can even use our couch at home, aka the couch stretch. And we're going to stand up nice and tall. Now we're going to squeeze our bum, get full hip extension here so we're not pushed back and leaning forward. We're nice and tall. And we're simply going to squeeze our glutes and breathe here. By breathing and relaxing every breath out, we'll allow ourselves to relax through the hip and extend through the movement. So once we're here 2 minutes, we switch our sides, we go to the other side. Another way we can work on hip extension is our lunge hip activation. So we're going to take a big step forward and we're going to bring that back leg off the ground and we're going to be in full hip extension here. So the things I want you to think about is shoulder in line with ankle, that back ankle. And what we're going to do here is start by drawing some circles with our hip. And we can move into things where we're dropping our elbow to the floor. And we can even add a reach to help improve that thoracic mobility. So we're here, 2 to 3 minutes each side, switching our sides once we're done, and repeating that same sequence. The final little stretch we can do is called a Brettzel. Now this was taught through my training with the FMS team, and that's involving thoracic mobility again and hip extension. So we're going to lay down on our back and we're going to bring a leg across and we're going to put ourselves into this nice little position that's going to work on hip extension and thoracic mobility at the same time. The key takeaway here is if you can't get into the required position, you then need to break out to the individual skills like the couch stretch or the lunging hip activation, and then some shoulder mobility, maybe even some pec release or work more trigger point to help get you into that position. So this is more of like a compound mobility stretch. So we're laying down, we're going to bring our leg across the body, pinning this knee to the floor. If we can't get our knee to the floor, we can put a foam roller underneath to help raise that level. But here, from here, we're going to bend this leg and pull our leg back towards our body. The opposite hand is on top of that knee and our other hand is on the foot from the leg behind us. We're then simply going to rotate open this way using our breath, and on the breath out we're going to move open. So we're going to breathe in. And we get into position here. Notice how I'm breathing all the way through the position. And then as we feel everything relax, we're going to increase that range by using our eyes, pulling ourselves to the floor. Once we get our shoulder to the floor, spend a bit of time here, still breathing, and then we come out under control. So we can switch our sides. But what you'll notice there is if you've got your hip extended and you can't rotate open, you need to break it out to our couch stretch, add some shoulder mobility in there, and see how we can improve that compound mobility stretch. The next we're going to go on to is internal and external rotation of the hip. So we focused on that forwards and backwards movement, being hip extension, that we associate with running and squatting and things like that. But what about those little stabilizers? Now, internal and external rotation, quite often we'll find we're good on one and horrible on the other. So what I want you to do is pick the one you're not good at or the one that gives you the most grief and work on that in your warm-ups. So a simple internal rotator warm-up that we can do is our simple hip prying drill. We're going to get into our squat position here. And we're going to be nice and tall, shoulders back, big chest, nice and upright. We're going to jam those elbows in and bring our hands together like so. So from here, we're just going to move back and forth. We're pivoting, we're turning on our feet, but our heels stay in contact with the floor. And we're going to sit here for 2 minutes, just moving back and forth, ever so slightly. Now, if we find that's a little bit too easy, we're going to move into a frog stretch. Now, this is going to test internal rotation. So we're going to be on the on the inside of our knees, so that VMO we mentioned in our trigger point series. And we're going to be legs spread nice and wide, knee in line with the hip. So from here, we're simply going to internally rotate, raising that foot off the floor into position here. So you might notice you're bad at internal rotation. This is my weakness out of internal and external. So I spend a lot of time here, 2 to 3 minutes in my warm-up each side to help improve that position. Now, if this is too hard for you, we bring our feet back, elbows up off, hands up, hands on the ground, elbows up off the floor, and we simply just go into that frog rock. Okay? Into position, trying to get our bum to our feet, rocking back and forth. So that'll cover pretty much internal rotation of the hip. Now it's time for external. What we're going to do, as the most advanced version we can probably look at for this particular series, is an active pigeon. Foot comes up in line with the hands. So your toes should be in line with the base of your palms, and you should be able to externally rotate that hip to the floor. Now, if you can't get here, we can simply regress this to a stretch. So we bring the leg across and we come down onto our elbows and we relax until we feel comfortable here. Once that occurs, maybe after 2 or 3 minutes, we bring this foot back in the middle of the hands, toes in line with the heel of the palm, and we're dropping that to the floor. So on the other side, you're dropping it to the floor. Now, the tricky thing with internal and external rotation, you might be tight externally on one side and tight internally on the other. It's important to understand where you're tight and where your asymmetries and limitations are, and then apply the mobility work to those direct areas. Don't neglect the other areas, but add the bits that improve your warm-up and leave the rest to the side. Assess it once you've done it, and then keep continually improving your warm-up structure with your mobility stretches that address your individual needs.